Good evening. Welcome to Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy, City University of New York, Medgar Evers College. I am Professor Felix Obi. Today is Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. And this is the second week of class. And today, I hope that you now know from this week's assessment that this lecture will be on barriers to trade. But right quickly again, let me reiterate a few housekeeping matters. The most important part of this housekeeping matter is that at each class, there are going to be some words and phrases that I would ask you to jot down. And these words and phrases cannot convey a technical knowledge, a technical subject matter knowledge that signals to your audience, whether it be at place of work and others as you engage socially, that you really do have a deeper understanding of our global trade and political economy and economics writ large. So the learning objectives for the, let me see. The learning objectives for this module is to understand why there can be barriers to trade, despite broad acknowledgement that trade is beneficial to all trading partners. As we interrogate this paradox, the paradox, of course, is as people acknowledge that trade is beneficial to all trading partners, yet there can be trade barriers. We will identify the different constituencies nationally and internationally that attempt to limit trade. So let us then address our learning objectives for this module by interrogating the following questions. Explain why trade among nations is beneficial. The World Bank Group, whom you would learn in the weeks ahead, has a stated mission to abolish poverty, acknowledges that while all countries have not benefited equally from trade, in part due to domestic political economy challenges, but overall, trade has generated unprecedented prosperity, helping to lift some 1 billion people out of poverty in the recent decades. As one example, trade leads to faster productivity growth, especially for sectors and countries engaged in global value chains. Now, this is one of those phrases that I think will be a good idea for you to make note of, and we will go into details about what global value chains means. For least developed countries, LDCs, and this is yet another category that I think you might want to make a notation of. For least developed countries with comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is a critical phrase. Comparative advantage simply means an economy's ability to produce a particular good or service at a lower opportunity cost than its trading partners. This links provides opportunities to specialize in making a single component or input product, like a keyboard, rather than a finished product, where advanced economies are more productive. So essentially what this says is that least developed countries who often don't have the technical prowess or efficiency, often due to lack of sophisticated infrastructure, may be able to produce the components that go into finished products that go into the consumer products. Global value chains also give LDCs, again, that is least developed countries, access to foreign technology, know-how, and investment. Additionally, consumers in especially advanced economies enjoy a greater variety of goods and services at lower cost, although some firms and workers in individual sectors may see their livelihood at risk due to increased competitive pressure. So if you ever bought bananas out of season, this will be because of global trade, the ability to move bananas from the Caribbean, from the South America to North America, and then the people who sell the bananas to us, as in this example, are able to use the foreign exchange that they earn to buy Fords and Chevys, which we make, of course, in the United States and Canada and parts of Mexico. So the second learning objective is to identify the different constituencies within nations that influence trade policies. Despite aforementioned benefits, globalization is under pressure from different constituents. Traditionally, multinational businesses are champions of international trade or globalization. We can think of multinational businesses as businesses that have production, sales, and distribution networks in different countries. With that respect, and a good example again of a multinational would be General Motors as an example, or Apple Computers. Traditionally, multinational businesses are champions of international trade or globalization, as they seek global efficiencies to shore up profit margins. Although, post-COVID, multinationals are increasingly considering nearshoring for their operations in an attempt to de-risk their supply chains. Here's what that really means very quickly. Typically, because multinationals have international affiliates, there was, until COVID, a tendency for multinationals to source the lower value chains in their production line to countries where wages are low, and sometimes countries where regulations are less, and or countries with less taxes. What COVID exposed, however, was the bottlenecks that came as a result of this dispersed supply chain, where it became challenging to get goods and services to consumers. And in an attempt to de-risk or hedge against disruptions in their global supply chain, multinationals are now considering to de-risk their supply chain by building capacity near their country or near the places where they have their greatest sales. This is called near shoring, as opposed to offshoring or inshoring. On the other hand, unions in particular blame globalization for the loss of manufacturing jobs in advanced economies. Environmentalists often blame environmental degradation and outsourcing of especially heavy industries to least developed countries with weak environmental regulation and enforcement mechanisms. So what really this shows the tension in globalization, why some constituents might oppose globalization. As one example, you can look at what we call the Rust Belt, which can stretch from parts of Pennsylvania all the way to parts of Indiana through Ohio, among other states. The loss of the steel industry to say Japan, to say China, creates an economic vacuum where industries have left to other countries. If you work in these sectors, of course, you can see how you would not be in favor of globalization because it is decimating jobs in your sector. On the other hand, if you work in a sector that exports goods and services overseas and those goods and services have relatively easier access to market because of globalization, and a critical institution we will get to discuss, the WTO or the World Trade Organization, then you might see how that person would be in support of international trade. The net effect, though, for the consumer, and assuming for that consumer, if their employment is not dislocated and they have effective demand, as a friend recently reminded me in economics, they are able to buy goods and services at relatively competitive prices because the goods and services are sourced efficiently. Service providers in especially advanced economies blame globalization for disruptions to supplies of vital goods and services such as vaccines. In combination, these constituencies, among others, influence domestic policy, which affects trade policy and global political economy. Third, explain the attitude of different constituencies, labor, business organizations, households towards trade. From the perspective of an advanced economy, labor, especially in low-end manufacturing, can be hostile to globalization as production is offshored to low-cost countries. So you could see if labor that might be inclined to seek employment in, say, factories that make flip-flops. It would be kind of hard to make flip-flops efficiently, cost efficiently in the United States, given our relatively high minimum wage, which is why if you are a multinational and you make flip-flops, you might be inclined to move your manufacturing to a low-end manufacturing country, or perhaps even let them manufacture and you import and you sell. Conversely, business organizations, especially multinationals, are natural champions of globalization due to the inherent benefits and efficiency. So if you're a multinational, you might want to have access to international markets where you can buy tires from countries that have rubber, where you can, for instance, build a car in Mexico, design a car in Detroit, build it in Mexico, and sell it in Argentina. That's globalization. So multinationals are natural champions for globalization. The net effect, though, is that the economic decisions that inform where multinationals base their production facilities often results in cost competitive goods and services. So this is where households benefit from competitive pricing on the consumption side of this equation, but could also suffer job losses to outsourcing of jobs and industry. So it can be a win-win or loss-loss for households. So if you go to a supermarket, you go to Target, you're able to buy goods and services that are priced competitively because they are sourced from the most competitive places. So your dollar would literally go further. However, if the person works in a sector that has been outsourced, then it will be hard for them to really benefit from globalization because, again, they will lack the capacity to engage in effective demand. These aforementioned conflicting attitudes combined with geopolitical tensions are prompting many industrialized countries to raise barriers to trade and investment and to subsidize the domestic production of goods deemed essential and strategic. Yet, tit-for-tat trade disputes and restrictions not only ultimately drive prices higher with associated inflationary pressure. So when we place, all things being equal, when we place tariffs and increase barriers to trade, they tend to increase because the producers will just pass on the cost to the consumer. All things being equal, this will lead to higher prices. All things being equal, higher prices will lead to inflationary pressure. But again, it can quickly get a little bit more complicated. And we will get to the idea of dialectical thinking in the weeks ahead. So to reiterate, tit-for-tat trade disputes and restrictions not only ultimately drive prices higher with associated inflationary pressure, they also weaken the rules-based international trading regime centered on the World Trade Organization. This phenomenon, in part, explains why smaller developing economies cannot be self-sufficient and need to export to import. Furthermore, many developing countries don't have the fiscal resources to counter steps taken by advanced countries to subsidize domestic production, and therefore adding to the need for IMF loan facilities, a topic we shall cover in the weeks ahead. And this is where that's really when the conversations get really interesting. The fourth learning objective is to distinguish the advantages and disadvantages international trade to different groups in a country. International trade offers the global south opportunities to grow. Oh, let me quickly clarify that with respect to economic conversations, the world can be categorized into two halves. The global south, which tends to be poorer, and the industrialized north. So there's the global north and the global south. The global north tends to be more industrialized, and that is where you will find North America, that is why you will find Western Europe, etc. So all things being equal, the global south almost can be a shorthand for developing to least developed countries. So international trade offers the global south opportunities to grow their economy and improve the complexity of their labor force through industrialization. On the other hand, the critical perspective of international political economy, centered on client-patron unequal economic relationship, will argue that the terms of international trade are too often very exploitative of the global south. Additionally, due to weak regulatory regimes and cost pressures, industrialization can often lead to pollution in the global south. Rivers and land pollution with associated public health challenges from the garment and the shipbreaking industries in countries like in the country of Pakistan are classic examples of environmental damage from industrialization. For the global north, international trade lends to efficiency of markets and price competitive products and services. But on the other hand, international trade for the global north can also lead to deindustrialization and the loss of manufacturing jobs and other low and high wage critical sector jobs, such as farming and chips manufacturing. 5. Research upon and analyze how international trade can enhance economic growth. And as we contemplate a response, it may be instructive to ground our research and thinking around two cognitive frameworks. I did mention dialectical thinking. It is critical to employ dialectical thinking, especially in matters of economics, especially behavioral economics. Dialectical thinking is the ability to think about that. Dialectical thinking argues that you don't truly understand an issue until you look at it from all sides. Then the other critical phrase is comparative advantage. A comparative advantage is an economy's ability to produce a particular good or service at a lower opportunity cost than its trading partner. Let's quickly discuss opportunity cost. So to fully understand the cost of manufacturing a product, or for economic purposes, we say widget. Widget is a synonym for products, goods, or services. The true cost of producing a widget is not just the dollars and cents you put into the widget, into the production facility. It is also the next best thing you could have done with that money had you not spent it producing that widget. So you should not merely say, I can afford to pay to produce this widget, so I'm going to produce this widget. The other question is, because no matter how much money you have, money is a finite commodity. No, there's always a limited set of money to play around. So the question an economist would ask is, should the United States, as an example, going back to the example of flip-flops, should the United States be subsidizing and investing money to produce flip-flops? Understand that there is a cost, right, to opportunity cost to investing this money on flip-flops. The government can, and there's only there's only but so much one can get paid manufacturing flip-flops, because there's only but so much you can sell flip-flops. It may be helpful that the government may say, well, we have the City University of New York. We're educating a lot of very smart scholars. Wouldn't it be better if we were instead to invest our money in high-value sectors that require skilled labor, which, by the way, we do have, thanks to Medgar Evers College as an example. And that would be thinking through the comparative advantage of a society to produce a goods and service, but also thinking through the opportunity cost of producing that goods and service. So this rounds up the formal part of our lecture today. Next week, we would, let me very quickly foreshadow what we're going to go through in next week's lecture by confirming that it will be on managing the global economy. So we want to begin to familiarize ourselves with the institutions that help manage the global economy. Specifically, we'll examine how global trade is managed among nations and review the institutions that have been set up since World War II to manage global trade, their histories, and their different roles. So this is what we will get into next week. We're beginning to set the foundations of the class, the foundations of understanding, and from there, we will begin to build on them on the actual negotiations and actual transactions. So this ends the formal part of our lecture tonight. I am going to turn off the video, and then take questions as necessary.